14 years is a long time to pretend a ghost isn't following you. I built a whole new life trying to outrun the night that broke me, convinced the past would stay buried if I never spoke its name again. And then one day, an email arrived from a boy I had never met, but whose face looked exactly like the friend who died in my arms. That was the moment I realized, some stories don't stay dead just because we want them to. I used to think that time softened the edges of grief, the way river water smooths a jagged stone. But some stones don't smooth, they just sink deeper, hiding themselves under layers of silt until someone happens to kick the riverbed and stir up everything you thought had settled. That's what it felt like when I opened that email. 14 years of carefully packed memories bursting open like a rotten seam. I stared at the boy's name for so long the letters ceased to look like words, they became shapes, symbols, warnings. A name I had never heard before, yet somehow recognized. His tone was polite, brave even, but beneath every line I could sense something fragile. A hunger. A reaching out. And the moment I realized who he was, something in my chest tightened and refused to let go. For days after reading it, I walked around with a heaviness I could not name. My wife noticed I was quieter than usual, but I told her I was tired from work. I always have a believable excuse, after all, I've practiced the art of hiding for over a decade. Even now, when I sit alone in the living room after everyone is asleep, it feels like I'm breaking some private rule I made with myself the day I left my hometown, that I wouldn't look back. That I wouldn't reopen the vault where I kept everything about him locked away. I kept my promise well. I never returned. I never spoke about him aloud. I never even allowed myself to think of the exact shade of blonde his hair was, or the way he laughed with his whole chest, head tilted back like he wasn't afraid of anything life could throw at him. But time has an ugly sense of humor. It waits for you to feel whole again before yanking you back into a past you worked so desperately to survive. When I clicked on the Instagram link the boy sent, my vision blurred for a moment. It felt as if I were staring at a ghost, not a metaphorical one, but something eerily, painfully literal. Same eyes, same jawline, same stubborn little smirk that always showed up whenever my best friend tried to pretend he wasn't amused. I had to sit down. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped my phone. And in that moment, it hit me with brutal clarity, I was not healed. I had only been pretending. There are people who say that grief changes shape, that over time it becomes easier to carry. Maybe that's true for some. For me, it became a seed buried deep inside, taking root quietly, pushing silent tendrils into everything I built afterwards. I didn't see it growing, but now, with that single unexpected email, the vines wrapped tight around my throat again. I could feel the years collapsing. I was 20 again, kneeling on a cold pavement, screaming his name until my voice was raw, holding him as the world around me fragmented into noise and panic. 14 years later I can still hear it, the final exhale, the impossible stillness, the sound my heart made when it broke in two. And now his son was asking to meet me. A 14-year-old boy who had grown up without parents, had been tossed from home to home, who knew only fragments of the man who should have been there for every birthday, every scraped knee, every dream and heartbreak. He wanted the truth. He wanted stories. He wanted to know the kind of person his father had been. And I was the only one left who could give him that. But all I felt was terror. The fear stayed with me, clinging like damp air in my lungs. I carried it to work, carried it through the grocery store, carried it even in bed as I lay awake listening to my daughters breathing softly in the next room. I wondered what they would think of me if they knew. I wondered whether I had a right to step into that boy's life when I had failed so completely to step into his mother's all those years ago. Back then I was drowning myself, I thought I had no strength left to give anyone else. But the truth, the one I've always been too ashamed to admit, is that I ran. I ran from that town, from my memories, from grief that was too loud and too present. I didn't stay to help her. I didn't stay to help him. And because I didn't, the boy ended up in the system. It was so easy to pretend I wasn't responsible. So easy to tell myself that I had no obligation. That I was just a scared 20-year-old who had lost the closest person in his life. But that excuse had always tasted sour. I had loved my best friend more than anyone besides my wife and children now. That kind of love leaves a mark, a responsibility, a quiet lifelong promise. And I broke it. Every day I lived a normal, peaceful life while that boy bounced between strangers, I broke it. I broke it without thinking, without even looking back to see what I'd left behind. Now he was reaching toward me, stretching a hand across 14 years of distance, and I couldn't bring myself to move. The shame of it gnawed at me. What kind of man was I? What kind of friend had I been? I imagined facing him, seeing that familiar face looking back at me in a 14-year-old form, and felt physically ill. What would I even say? How could I explain a lifetime of silence? How could I tell him about the night his father died, without falling apart right in front of him? I had no idea. I had no map for this. One evening, when the house was quiet, I opened the email again and reread every line. He had written it so carefully, so maturely for someone his age. He spoke not like a boy desperate for answers, but like someone who had already lived through too much to simply ask for anything lightly. His politeness made it even harder. He didn't demand. He didn't accuse. He only said that he understood if I was uncomfortable. That he wanted to know more, but he didn't want to cause harm. He wrote that the pictures of me and his father made him feel something he couldn't explain, a sense of belonging he had never felt before. And then he said something that nearly broke me, if you don't want to talk to me, that's okay. I just thought, maybe you could tell me one story. Just one. Something about what he was like. I put the phone down and pressed my hand over my face. My chest felt too small for my heartbeat. The truth was, I had 1,000 stories. Stories of summers spent building forts in the woods, of schoolyard fights we started on each other's behalf, of nights we stayed up imagining futures we never thought would break in half. But telling them meant acknowledging that he was gone. Really gone. It meant lifting the lid on a grief that I had kept sealed so long I no longer knew what would happen if it spilled out. For days I tried to decide. The boy was waiting. And I was pretending to be a man who hadn't already failed him once. I reached a point where I couldn't ignore it anymore. Every morning I woke feeling like the world was slightly out of place, like a picture frame tilted just enough to drive you mad if you stared long enough. My wife noticed my distraction. She asked me twice if something had happened with work, if I was stressed, if I needed time alone. I shook my head both times. I couldn't tell her. I didn't know how. How do you explain to someone that a part of your life they never knew existed has suddenly come back from the dead? How do you tell your partner that there's an entire story beneath your skin that you never dared to speak, because even saying his name felt like ripping open a scar? Still, the pressure grew. I found myself taking long drives after work with no destination in mind, pulling over in empty parking lots and staring at the steering wheel. I imagined driving back to the town I'd once sworn to abandon. I imagined walking the old streets, passing the park where we spent half our childhood, the alley where he punched a boy for calling me names, the hospital I swore I'd never see again. The thought made my stomach clench. But the boy was there. His son. The last piece of him. 14 years old, waiting for an answer. One night, unable to sleep, I stepped outside onto the porch. The air was cool, still, the kind that makes you hear your own heartbeat. I sat on the steps, elbows on my knees, staring at the driveway in front of me. I don't know how long I stayed like that, but eventually a memory rose to the surface, him, my best friend, sitting exactly like this one night after his girlfriend told him she was pregnant. We were both terrified, but he'd been excited too, glowing even. He'd said, "I'll figure it out. I have to. I'm going to do better than my parents did. And you'll be there, right? You're practically his uncle already." It felt like a punch to the gut. I realized then that as much as I tried to bury it, I missed him. I missed him so fiercely, so completely that some nights I still instinctively turned to call him when something funny happened or when life felt too heavy. Grief is strange like that, it makes the dead feel more present than the living, sometimes. And now his son was alive, breathing, writing to me with the same stubborn hope his father once had. Maybe this wasn't just about the boy needing answers. Maybe it was also about me finally facing the ghost I had been running from for 14 years. The thought didn't make it easier. It only made my heart ache deeper. It happened quietly. No dramatic breakdown, no cinematic revelation. Just a moment, a very specific moment, when I understood that avoiding him would not protect me. It would only prolong a pain I had been carrying half my life. I was sitting in my car during my lunch break, holding my phone, thumb hovering over the email app. I told myself I'd just read his message again. Nothing more. But as I scrolled through his words, something shifted. Maybe it was the way he said he never had anyone to tell him what his parents were like. Maybe it was the way he described keeping the pictures of me and his father beside his bed, like they were a piece of the family he'd never known. Or maybe it was the simple, heartbreaking honesty of his final line, "I think my dad would want you to have a good life. I hope you did." I felt the air leave my lungs. Because I had. I had made a good life. I had a family, stability, laughter in my home. And there was a guilt in that too, a quiet guilt I'd learned to ignore. I built something beautiful out of the ruins of that night, and yet the boy, his boy, had grown up in chaos and uncertainty. Not because of me, I always told myself. But also, not entirely without me. I closed my eyes, leaned my head back against the headrest, and let the truth settle. I couldn't fix the past. I couldn't undo the decisions, or the running, or the silence. But I could answer him. I could give him something real. Something human. Something his father would have wanted him to have. My hands shook as I opened a new message. I stared at the blank screen for a long time, unable to type a single word. Every sentence felt too small, too fragile for what needed to be said. After nearly 20 minutes, I finally wrote the simplest thing I could manage: "Hi. I got your message. I'd like to talk." I didn't send it. Not yet. Instead I let it sit there, glowing on the screen, while I tried to steady my breath. I imagined what it would be like to actually meet him. To see my best friend's face reflected in someone new. To answer questions I had never dared ask myself. The fear didn't go away. If anything, it grew heavier, deeper, more complicated. But beneath it, quiet, trembling, was something else. A sense of responsibility. A sense of inevitability. A sense that maybe this was the moment I'd been avoiding, not because it would break me, but because it might finally force me to let go. I knew then that I was going to send the message. I just didn't know when. But the decision was made, even if my hands weren't ready to accept it. The day I finally sent the message was unremarkable in every external way. A Tuesday. Mild weather. Kids arguing over breakfast cereal. My wife humming while packing lunches. Life moving in its usual rhythm, unaware that something tectonic was shifting beneath the surface. I waited until the afternoon, when the house was quiet and I was alone in my office, sunlight spilling across the desk. My phone lay in front of me, the unsent message still open, as though waiting for my courage to catch up. For a long time, I just stared at it. My heart hammered so loudly I could hear the pulse in my ears. It felt like standing at the edge of a cliff I'd spent 14 years walking away from. But cliffs don't get smaller with distance, they only get steeper when you finally turn back. I don't know what exactly pushed me over the edge. Maybe it was the echo of my best friend's voice in my memory. Maybe it was imagining the boy reading my silence as rejection. Maybe it was simply that grief, left unspoken for too long, becomes a language of its own, begging to be released. Whatever it was, my finger moved before I could stop it. Send. The moment it went through, I felt a wave roll through me, fear, relief, dizziness, grief, all tangled into something too large to name. I set the phone down and pressed my palms against my eyes, breathing slowly, waiting for the feeling to pass. It didn't. But it softened, enough that I could finally look around the room and feel present again. He replied an hour later. His message wasn't long. "Thank you," he wrote. "Really. Whenever you're ready, I'm here." It was the kind of response only someone who has learned not to expect anything from life could write. No pressure. No demands. Just hope, fragile but persistent. And for the first time since opening his first email, I felt something inside me loosen, a knot I hadn't even known was still tied. I wrote back. We exchanged a few messages. Light ones at first. Then deeper ones. He asked about his dad carefully, as if worried he might hurt me by asking too much too soon. I told him small things at first, his laugh, the way he always stole my fries, the tattoos he wanted but never got. The boy's responses were filled with wonder, sadness, and a quiet gratitude that broke my heart every time. Eventually, he asked if we could meet. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no either. I said, let me think about it. And I did. I thought about it every minute of the day, even when I wasn't trying to. I imagined driving back to the town I ran from. I imagined seeing him walk toward me with my best friend's face. I imagined finally saying out loud the name I had carried like a bruise on my soul for so long. And slowly, something changed in me. The fear didn't disappear, but it no longer ruled me. The grief didn't vanish, but it no longer demanded silence. And the past didn't hurt any less, but it began to feel like something I could face, not something I needed to run from. One evening, sitting on the porch again, watching the sky turn gold, I realized the truth: meeting him wasn't just something he needed. It was something I needed too. For closure. For healing. For forgiveness, of him, of myself, of the boy I used to be who didn't know how to stay. I picked up my phone and typed the message before I could lose my nerve. Let's meet. I'm ready. I sent it. And for the first time in 14 years, I felt like I could finally breathe.